Gimel Tahara Tuvshem Pebez, Virichem Abum Shem Shem English Tret Gaskom Kapun and the Gantacho Shavoilam, Hand is a spezielle Schief and Shalos and True with Binyon the Kashrus, Pesach, Lekol Shona, eine von der größten Mumchen, das kommt alle Jahre, Mamisch, man größer Korset Zatoiv, weil Goin, Yechezkel, Auerbach, Schlitt, was Joshe, Vroish, Vada, Kashrus, KSA, noch eine Sache andere Organisationen in der ganzen Welt, fragen und scheiden für Menschen die Jahren, was alle Jahre kommt da, eben schon gehen kurz weiter, bechazet sein Am Hashem, was soll zähnliche Tausende Iden Hände schüren, wir bekommen Chizik von der Schüren. Der Heilige Schür ist nicht, was ihr Däni, Chavrusse von der Heilige Magitschir, Abzev Weintraub, Nishmas Ove, Ramot, Ramosh Alevi, und noch Nishmas Immer Rifke, Bachsab Zvi. Jetzt aber der Covenant Sie aufzuriefen, Auerbach für der Heilige Schür, Shalos und Tshuvis.
So it's embarrassing to be. You have here a chevra that invented the idea, the Irgun Shir Torah, that is mamish l'kavod Pesach. The Tzitz rule here says mamish that the laila kiyoyim yoyer, the chiyuv of what it means to be a yid on Pesach and to transform darkness into light. The Irgun Shir Torah Amal, there are people here that remember what was a shir, a public shir, that you give a clap on the people, someone's giving a shir and 12 people would come maybe to a shibur, that's called a shir. And Baruch Hashem, they eingefeinst the idea that shiurim have a vitality that spreads not only in the community, but lemerchakim, and not only once a year, but daily, people come to be shoyeh from the terror that these people spread. They should be gebenched, they should have a slough in everything they have in their Hashem. My father's eternal bracha once made a very interesting observation. It says in the pasuk by Tzeras, in the parsha that we just read, it says that you come to the Kayim, and if the nega is omek min ha'or, if it's deeper, what's made this omek min ha'or deeper than the skin? There's an interesting medrash. When Yaakov was supposed to go to Yitzchak, when Rivka was sending Yaakov to Yitzchak, he said, I can't go because Hein Ochi, says Esav is an ish soyer, is in ganzen bewachsen, he has hair, he's very, very hairy. V'ani ish cholok, I don't have that here. So the Medrash says an interesting thing. The Medrash says, often arts, the Medrash says, it's a mashal lamar davidaima, that if you ever see by a field where they thresh, where they separate the straw, the chaff from the wheat, the wind is blowing and there's all this mites, all the chaff is blowing, and if two people walk by, one of whom has a lot of hair, it gets all tangled into his hair. And if somebody is bald, so when they walk away, the bald guy gave the zay, and he just wipes it off. And the guy with the hair spends the rest of the day trying to pick out all the schmutz from his hair. So Yaakov was saying that the tamtzis of vos heistas a yid, and lahavdil vos heistas a goy, his averis are mushras, they're angevart still in, they're tied into his hair, you can't get it out. A yid lahavdil, even if a person does something wrong, and get the vish up and say, you go weiter. So by tzaras, when is the warning of tzaras that maybe you did something wrong? If it's not just skin deep, it's not just on the skin. If it's omek me'or, you go to the kayin, you go to a mayre derech, you go to your Rebbe, and he says, Herzumen kind, it's angevart. There's something there. You better start working on getting it out. When it comes to kashrus, there are people have gotten used to certain ideas that this is acceptable, this is not acceptable, and it's very important to know that things change frequently, and it's kedai to constantly be aware and to be careful and to be mindful that it's your responsibility, the final analysis, it's your responsibility what you're going to eat, what you're going to put in your mouth, and it's your achrayus to make sure that it's eis gehalten 100%.
Yidden, Amolig Yidden used to be makbid to use not throw away dishes on Pesach mit gewusst, what the eigene special, a weggelegte Kelim for Pesach, Kneine Hora, there's a Ribi Mishpachas, and Einiklach and Schneers mit Edem is bekommt von alle Katzwei Tevel to be by the Eltern, and it's very, very difficult to stand and wash so many dishes, and not everybody has enough. So we broke into Klal Yisrael, paper plates, plastic plates, cups, bowls, foam, waxed. The shaila is, what about for ganz Yahr, and what about for Pesach? And just like Rabbi Auerbach just said, sometimes there's a chadish something. They came out because they asked the foam things. They came out with a new wood pulp plates, and this year itself, people sent me a bunch of times this year that they were found to have insects in it. But to update the oilam, what's good for a whole year, what's good for Pesach.
Yes, it's astonishing. You would never think that it should be so bold, but I saw when they started bringing in these wooden plates. If you look at them carefully, you can see that pressed into two things. First of all, which would probably be much less of a child, the ones that are pressed into the wood. They don't take the finest kind of wood to do this. But even so, in the places that these things are manufactured, these factories are often very dirty. They don't sanitize the woods before they take the fibers and collapse them and compress them into the plates. And I've seen myself packages that were crawling with bugs inside the packages. The good news is that it's very obvious. I mean, if it's there, you see it. It's not something hidden. It's not like the stuff that you have in a lettuce that you have to be lighting with a light box, and you can see it. But it certainly has to be aware that you have to look for it on these bamboo plates. Concerning the other ones, plastic plates never have any shaila. Stam plastic ware. That means plastic plates, plastic cups, plastic bowls, plastic silverware. We're never going to have any shaila whatsoever, because of the way they're manufactured. Does not lend itself to anything that's not kosher.
Even the fancy the disposables with the prints on it?
The ones that you have that have paint on it will be marked in the next 2 hours by saying the word China is synonymous with not acceptable. Anything made in China, you're going to assume is going to have something wrong with it. And in fact, since most of these things come from China, they print very poorly. And the paint comes off into the food, and it comes off onto your hands as you end up using it. It's not mistaver b'chlal that there's a shaila in Hilchas Kashrus about the paint, but it's an umgeschmack to have the paint come off onto your joints. But it's not a kashrus. You're not going to end up with a shaila in kashrus there. Paper, there's an unending rumor that paper towels are made with wheat starch, or some other time starch that's also the way this started because somebody remembered that a long time ago when people used to go to school, learn science, they remember in 8th grade that if you take iodine and you put iodine on something, if it turns blue, that means there's starch in it. So somebody took a paper plate and put iodine and it turned blue. So he said, oh, it must be made with starch. No. I'm sorry? No. Well, again, that's all part of the same thing. And the problem is that the starch is inherent in the wood fibers. That it doesn't turn blue from cornstarch or wheat starch. It turns blue from the starch that is part of the wood particles. There is some degree of starch that's used in the manufacturing process. I spoke to a number of manufacturers, and they said that it's unknown in the industry to be using wheat starch either in the manufacture of the paper goods, the manufacture of the paper towels, or in the glue. And that was always the big tumult, because there are two parts that are glued. When you have a roll of paper towels, they started off on the core by gluing the paper there and then rolling it, and then they spray glue, and the end, the last leaf should also stick to it. It's the people I spoke to. I'm not going to say, you never say never. The manufacturers that I spoke with said that it is not benimtza at all to be using wheat starch on any of these things. Cornstarch sometimes. Usually it's a synthetic glue. It's not a starch-based glue. If it would be a kidneous glue on the first one, if a person wants to feel comfortable and they can peel off the first 2 or 3 layers of the paper towel, that's l'ravta milza. Al pi halacha, it's not clear b'chlal that even if it was some sort of starch, Certainly before Pesach, it's certainly bottle, there's no question about using it. Anything you use before Pesach is not a question. But even on Pesach, to say that it reinvigorates because it's dried out, there's nothing there, it's not a starch. But if a person wants to be machmer and take off the first 2 or 3 pieces of the paper towel and use it for wiping their hands instead of food, there's not a problem. Using it on your hands is no shiloh whatsoever. There's also a question concerning the finish, the hard finish on paper plates, because sometimes that has some starch in it. That starch is frequently a potato starch. A cornstarch is not mostly in America, and if you want to be machmer, if they're plasticized, they have paper plates that have plastic sprayed on it. Those have no shiloh whatsoever. The regular plastic plates have no shiloh whatsoever. Even the paper plates, there is a very strong body in halacha that says that the slurry, the starch that they make to spray on it, is no longer considered a food item. It's not going to be considered, it doesn't come apart from, it's part of the paper, it doesn't get soaked out into the food. Even if it would, it's such a mashu that it's not a question in halacha. If the person wants to be machmer, generally you reserve tavel of bracha for something that has a halachic basis. It makes you feel good. It's not even tavel of bracha. Paper cups, if they're used with cold, they're no shiloh whatsoever. Hot use cups. Foam cups, I spoke with Dart. Dart has a mashus of a stearic acid, which could come sometimes, depending which supplier gives it to them, can come from tallow, but it's burnt out in making the process, and it's certainly bottled by alfei alofim, and there's nothing there. When people make coffee, and they see some oil on the top, so they think there's be'en of oil there. What that is on the top of your coffee is actually the coffee oil that comes from the coffee itself, not from the manufacturing. And also there's a number of oils of stearics and other acids, other fatty acids that are used in the manufacturing process. There's no reason to assume that's coming from nevela oil that's used in the foam.
Have paper cups for hot?
So the ones that are not wax, but the plastic inside has no question whatsoever. Even the ones that are plain paper they're not starched on the inside.
Okay, then they have party cups that are waxed inside.
Well, the wax you can't use with hot, or else it would melt into your coffee.
Okay. For cold, it's not a problem.
No.
Okay, now baking pans. There's aluminum, there's paper, there's corrugated, there's cupcake cups. Now, some of the baking pans, grada, have ashgacha that ain't tzarich tevila, which the ashgacha is known to many who know Hashem not to be worth much. And the shaila is, what about anything else that goes onto it? Because it has to have some type of oil or something to make sure that it doesn't stick to each other and it comes out easy.
Okay. Here is b'derech klal. First of all, b'derech klal, there's a yid who asked me not to mention his name. He just wrote a 4-page tshuva about the Einit Tzarech Tefillah things. And you see that, and he has names, and he has the different hashgachas, and he spoke with them, and it's strung together with kulas and sveikas and tzirufim, which are so shvach that it is beyond. A regular person would not be soymech on such types of kulas to be makel on paspalter, and certainly to be makel on an item which needs tefillah. We'll get there in a minute. Of what kind? A keli that needs tefillah d'oraisa. The Rosh says that if you cook in that keli, you're not allowed to eat that food, and you have to make hechsher kelim on the keli before you can table it. Now it's a Rosh. It's not.
We don't hold like that.
I'm just trying to show you that there's a rishon that holds how far it goes, the chiyuv of tevilah. So even if you want to say that, we don't have to go like the Rosh. But l'maisa, certainly, if a person wants to go to be yaitze, the deis of what it means to be toivel, to these types of ideas, there is a law in China that a contract that's not written in Chinese has no validity. And there's no question that dina de mechus dina certainly goes on commercial exchanges. There's no question. there's no question of, forget about the whole machlekes Rishayim of what's pshat and dinul mechus adina, whether he has to have it, he can't have it, whether it has to be a shalit, who can put you to death, can't put you to death. But there's no question in halacha that dinul mechus adina applies to normal business transactions. And if the law in China is that a contract, in order to be valid, has to be written in Chinese, so that it means that if you write it in English, it's nothing, it's bebelich and borscht. So if you say that you're buying, what these people say, that they're buying the whole geschäft, and they're buying all the sechira, and that they're paying for the workers a schir yom, so it's not a shaila of and kind of b'shvach pli. And there are shailas, but sehepzich nitan. And there are various eitzes that they try to use. Maybe it could be b'diavad, not b'diavad. I have not seen any of this is talking about the types of kalim that require tevila. This would include the hot pots, the hot water makers, other types of kalim fashidins that have. The reason they do this is because they new kalim have built-in computers and chips and things like that you obviously can't type with. Liani, I have a West Bend 30 cup, like my grandmother used to have, and you keep it on the counter, and you can title it, and you let it dry for 2-3 days, and you have hot water. I have about 8 or 12 coffees a day, and Baruch Hashem, it does it once a year. It burns out. You buy a new one for $30, and Shalom Al Yisrael. B'negei the bekelach, B'negei the bekelach. This is a machlekes. It's a machlekes paiskim whether it's considered chad pami or not. Chad pami means that it has one use. There is a strong basis in halacha that if something is not for permanent use, it doesn't have a din of a keli, and if it doesn't have a din of a keli, it doesn't require tevila. There's another tziruf that it's, and I know the Rabbi Kamenetsky is like that aluminum is not the type of metal that is mentioned as being tzarich tevila. So if you make it tziruf for these things, it's one thing. Now, if a person is going to take their one-time keli and use it for the entire year, over and over and over, obviously it's not a one-time keli. But if a person, faginzach, that instead of going to table these things, he's going to go and throw it out every shus. Also, if you're going to be machmer and you're going to table these things, there are a number of stores that have mikvahs there in the store. Two things you have to worry about. One is that if it's not your keli, you can't table it. So you have to table it after you buy it. And second of all, there has to have a hashgacha on the mikvah. Many people don't realize that a mikvah is not just some place where you makabetz water, some place the balabos builds it himself and fills it up with a hose, without a hose, however he's going to fill it up. But on an ongoing basis, there is hashgacha required on a mikvah. You're dealing here, if you're tabling this keli, it's a dairaisa. If you're tabling for a dairaisa, you got to make sure that your mikvah is kosher. And for that, like every other delicate and intricate piece of halacha, you need somebody that's a buck in these halachas and is a zoriz to make sure to be on top of these things. There should be a letter of hechsher for the mikvah, or at least there's a responsible person that you can call and say, when was the last time this mikvah was checked?
I called today a certain store. He told me that a certain Rav gives hashgacha. I called that Rav. He said, I made a mikvah for him a nice couple of years ago, and I told him what to do.
Yeah.
I called a different store, and they told me that this Rav gives hashgacha. I called that Rav. He says, and he has no idea what's going on there. He made the mikvah years ago.
Yeah. This is people don't realize it. People don't realize it, but you need more than good intentions to get good results, and this is one of those things.
What about the corrugated or the paper stuff?
Corrugated. The good news is that the glue. What happens? The way you make corrugated, those bekelach that you use to when you make, especially if you don't make the brooks, if you have the potato starch things, you need the bekelach that stick to them. So you have to take the whole thing out. The way they make the bekelach is they roll the paper under a series of rollers that have glue distributing, applying the glue as it rolls through, and they have the corrugations that then fall on them and get glued to that. That glue, according to the best information I was able to gather from glue manufacturers, is not made from wheat starch, or they'll use, if anything, they'll use a cornstarch. But it's ready made. It's made before Pesach. It's certainly not a shadow, but even afterwards, it's a shadow whether or not that kidney is, whether the cornstarch has any substance.
Any cupcake cups that are a problem? Do you have to get the one with the hechsher?
Yeah, the way the cupcake grease-proof paper, which is what the cupcake holders are, because else, if they wouldn't be grease-proof, when you put the batter, it's a blila racha. It'll put it into the cup. It'll soak into it, and you'll not be able to come out. So, in order to stop the batter or the liquid from being absorbed into the paper, they put an oil into the paper. All of these baking goods are made with either a silicone, the very expensive ones are made with silicone, or they're made with an oil. I've seen where they've been made with oils from what Hashem min Chai, it's called taloamines, and certainly there are two things about it. Certainly it's going to be bottled b'diavad if you cook first. I mean, if you already used it, b'diavad you don't have to go home today and throw out everything you've cooked already, because the b'diavad is always going to be good. But l'chatchila, nagehit niyid, absolutely should buy something with the hechsher on it.
The gabi food
from a hechsher that knows how to give a hechsher.
Yeah. Any napkins, tissues, paper tablecloths, is there any issue to put food on Pesach, or the first is no problem? Even the paper tablecloth.
All the research that I've done, people I've spoken to, have all said that they have never found a problem with any of these things, because even if there's starch used in an earlier stage of the paper making, it's neutralized and made alkaline by the addition of acids and later things like that.
Plastic baggies, sandwich bags, throwaway tablecloths.
Certainly not. None of those have problems.
Aprons.
None of those have talc on them. What they use a lot in any of these applications is something called talc, which is a very finely ground stone. It's a powdered stone, and the plastic will stick to each other. But sometimes they will put in a sprinkling of talc, but it's just ground up stone. It's not a food item.
Gloves used with food. Do you have to make sure that it's not powdered?
Yes, that is important, because almost all these gloves are coming from China, and that dirty word again. And you never know what they're going to put into the gloves. And certainly gloves, when you take it off, you'll see if you have gloves that are not powder free, when you take it off, your hands will be coated with powder.
I told people.
Chinese. Why don't they write the contract from Chinese?
You're right. If they were aware of that, I suppose they could do that.
I told people in the past not to use balloons on Pesach. Is there a basis for that?
Not that I've been able to find out, and I've been researching that. And generally,
some of them have.
Some of them have talc. The only thing they have a powder, but the only powder I was able to mevar that they're using is talc, not starch, because the starch would get gummy from the
saliva.
From when you blow it up.
And beach balls.
Same thing.
New pots. Are there any chashas of oils that shine, they give it a finishing touch, and does it make a difference if it's cast iron or not?
Well, cast iron, certainly. Cast iron would turn to rust within 10 minutes of its being manufactured. The first thing they do, as soon as they finish manufacturing a cast iron keli, is they season it in with oil. Now, oil or shortening. The ones made in America, Lodge and those, claim that they're using vegetable oil. It's difficult to know what they're using. The ones that are made outside the United States certainly have to be choshesh that they are seasoned, that cast iron pots are seasoned with something else. The good news is it's very easy to kasher it. In order to kasher a cast iron pan, griddle, or something like that, you put it through a self-cleaning cycle in an oven, and as soon as it comes out, you re-season it, because what the self-cleaning does is it burns out any finish, and you have to immediately refinish it, and you do that by smearing it with oil and putting it back in the oven at 200 degrees for an hour, and then it's seasoned, then it's good. The other items, there was a shmua many years ago that one of the big companies, Farberware, uses alya to shine their pots. I actually went to the company, I went with others, and I spoke to others, and it's never been substantiated, it's never been proven or shown, if you forget about proven, it's never been shown to have any type of, it doesn't make any sense. The company thought we were crazy. Like, why would they take animal fat and smear it on? There's so many better oils that are cheaper, and they don't go rancid, it doesn't get, you don't have to worry about it. So I've never been able to substantiate that, but...
Belsky told me that even if it would be, and the way they polish it with such heat that the friction would take it off and kasher it, so...
I didn't hear that directly, so I didn't say it over.
Dish soap and dish powders, the gabe a whole year doesn't need a hechsher, since it's a dove pogum mit chilosoi, even though it has a flavor and it has a smell. And what about the gabe Pesach? Let's say somebody did it already. Is it gefährlich, or you have to try to get rid of hechsher?
Okay. I'll tell you a davar tmiya ad ma'id, and you never know why. But somebody came over to me when I was working at MPGS, and there was a type of a hand soap. It was called milk and honey. And he said, maybe this is made with bas v'cholov. And maybe you can't, he says, I know before you tell me you don't eat it, he said, but there's Nisan enough, it's bas v'cholov. So I said, okay, a guy comes over and has a shaili after, you can't just mach it back. So I called the company, and they said it's interesting because the soap is made out of fat. It's one of the amusing things about the way the Rebbeinu Shalom made the world, that in order to wash off grease from your hands, you have to use oil. So, but it's saponified. There's a process called saponification that you do with the oil, and it changes the molecular structure. So I called the company, and I found out they were using not kosher oil to make the soap that they made into this milk. And so I said, okay, it's interesting, but it's still not an Issa Hana. The only time you have an Issa Hana is only when it's derech bishalukah, and they don't cook it, and the milk, and it's nevela. There are so many reasons. But the guy said, yeah, but maybe. So fine. So it happened to be that my boss at MPGS, at that time was in Eretz Yisrael meeting. He was having a meeting with Reb Chaim. So I said to him, he has to ask the shaila. So he asked Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim told him, take it off the shelf, not to sell it. So this is a ma'aser rav, that from such a thing you should now.
Maybe I'll see.
Yeah. So we're getting there. The beer halacha. I know that l'mashal Rav Belsky zechron levracha. I can tell you from my own personal knowledge. Rav Belsky was makbid that he only used kosher soap, even for showering, even for bathing, because the beer halacha brings down that an ogehit niyid should be careful that since sicha keshasiya, that smearing something is like drinking, so you don't, even though, and the beer halacha writes there, you're going to say it's bottle, it's pogum, yeah, but still, an ogehit niyid doesn't do that. So that's benigeya soap, benigeya soap for dishwashing soap. It's very difficult to shtelzu the same type of level of chaymer. Befrat that most of the time, and there's just a practicality, that when somebody comes to you with a shaila, I washed milchiks and fleishiks together. The first thing you ask them is, were you wearing dishwashing gloves? What's the difference whether you're wearing gloves or not? Because if you weren't wearing gloves, the water was not yad seledes, or else you couldn't be washing it. If you're washing with your hands in the water is not hot, al pi halacha. So that's the first thing. So most people, it's a shaila about a dishwasher where a taka gets hotter inside the dishwasher. Al pi halacha, there's no question whatsoever that all these items are considered nifsal me'achilus kelev, and you do not have to worry about using them. It's a suffix. There are a number of levels of sveikas that you don't have to worry about it. Now, that being said, it's a mini kadmin by Yidden is that they're not going to take onto their estzike something that's not kosher. So usually these questions are only b'di'evid, where you bought where you went shopping, not your wife, and you came home with the wrong stuff and you didn't realize till after she washed the dishes, or you washed the dishes.
Every year we ask the same shaila because it's negeya. Somebody, Rosh Tzadkani, is calling about the lipsticks. Do you have to get one with the best hechsher, or I'm talking about even for a whole year, especially for Pesach, which it touches the food that they eat?
I can tell you this. I spoke to two from the Chashuv of Pesach Hadar, and they both told me that Me'ikra din, there's no problem, even if there's carmine. And the only question you can run into is some red colors have a colorant which is called carmine, which comes, it's from a beetle, it's from a bug. Every single one of the lipsticks that has that color also has a combination of a bunch of other colors also. So you always have zev zegayrim, you always have that is something that's not a psik reisha, because if it would be psik reisha, then every time you put something in your mouth, you take away your lipstick, you wouldn't have any lipstick left. That's just the way it works. So it's not a psik reisha. And it's a davar she'enim schaven. And it's zev zegayrim. So there's certainly, it is a shver zach to say that it's also. But again, there are, you can say, it's a famous story, I forget which Rav, they say it from a lot of Rabbanim, that his Rebbetzin was listening to Shaila, and he said it's mutter. So she said, what do you mean? How can you do that in a Yiddish kach? So the Rav said, as I state in Halach, he says, davon ankommen zu euch in euer Shulchan Aruch, weil die ganze Kach gewinnt treif. It's because in their meaning. So I can tell you, I know people, my wife, my daughters don't use that. There are certain types that are kosher, that have a hechsher, or that I've researched and that have no problematic ingredients. I know that Rav Belsi once spoke about lipstick having tallow in it. He spoke about that. It has not been that way for many years. There is no lipstick that I have researched, and I look into cosmetics for a number of hechsherim. I've never found that they should have Shem Menachai. The only shilos that you come across are either the carmine for the coloring, or on Pesach, they have certain types of technical, they have kitnius oils that remain in the oil state. So a person, thank you very much. They have so that would be, on Pesach it would be a problem. But the rest of the year, al pi halacha, you don't have to have a hechsher, but al pi hanhaga, it's a difficult thing to tell a person that they should put on their mouth something that's not kosher.
What about chapstick and any other lip balm, all these things that they put on their lips?
Chapstick, the original chapstick is absolutely kosher without any question. Just it's not made with anything after that. The ones that have flavors, I get with these shilos all the time. It's really, really impossible to unravel all these things. Something that doesn't have a hechsher. And this is some as the idea ba'alma, when you ask a shaila, is this kosher, is it not kosher? Unless you have the actual formula, if it has more than a couple of ingredients, or if it has flavors, it's impossible to say, this is kosher. The best you can say is that, b'derech kal l'mashal, people call me all the time about medications. Now, the medications have flavors. A candy, you don't give a hechsher on a candy until you went through every single ingredient down to the lightest level. That means that if there is a flavor, you take apart the flavor. If the flavor has a subformula, you take apart the subformula. If the subformula has something in it from China or from somewhere else, you have to find out where and what. And it's a malacha. It's not a malacha the kalvaniki. It's shmutzik and it's dirty and it's time consuming. Now, if somebody's going to come along, the people call me 1:30 in the morning. They say my kid is 104. Can I give him this medicine? So the answer is always yes. Why? Because I don't know who you are. You don't know who I am. But if your kid is sick enough that you call me at 1:30 in the morning, the kid says sakana, you have to give him the medicine. But also, the practicality is that it's very rare to have a flavor that's echt not kosher. It might not be mahadrin, it might be something that you shouldn't use, but in the medication, we're not talking lechatchila. You're not doing it because so it's not something you would do for a candy. For a medication, it is sufficient. So the most you can do about a product that you don't give an actual hechsher on is say, my judgment is like this. My experience speaks like that. So, coming back to chapstick, if somebody calls and says, I have chapped lips, you use chapstick. And what about the flavor? I have to dye your flavor. I don't like the way it tastes. I can't, so fine, I'm not going to go, tell you that you can use something that doesn't have a hechsher. So that's the answer to your question. Are all these things, the original stacked chapstick is acceptable without a shaila? If you want the flavored ones,
And for Pesach also to...
Yeah.
And plain Vaseline on lips is never a problem because
Right.
petroleum.
Vaseline it's a petroleum product.
Unless it
Same thing you
has
put in your car.
some Vaselines have additives.
Yeah, the additives are usually something just to soften it. It's not Vaseline. That's really cream. Thank you. Okay, this is a lip therapy. This isn't Vaseline. It has the Vaseline name brand, and it has on it white petroleum. That's it. That's the only thing. Yeah, and a flavor. So because this is a flavored item, so the flavor is something that you have to be concerned about. But if this would be unflavored, then it's just a petroleum. It's a faglivita piece of gasoline. That's all it is.
When it comes to food handling, a lot of people that work in the food industry, they have to make their hands wet the whole time to work in the kitchen.
Right.
They get chapped hands, and then they smear the hands, and then they touch the food. Which hand creams do you have to worry about? Which hand creams and lotions don't you have to worry about? Plain Vaseline pashtus, you don't have to because it's plain Vaseline.
Yeah, but you don't smear plain Vaseline. You can't use plain Vaseline. You need something. You can't stand there for the rest of your life rubbing it until it goes in. You need something like that goes on right away and quickly rub it in.
And it does stay. It does leave residue.
If
for sure.
it leaves the residue, it would be a problem. If it leaves the residue,
It does.
There is something that you shouldn't be using. You should use. I usually tell people when they have the shalos to use so little that you can rub it in and it doesn't leave any residue on your hands.
This is even for a whole year. College came for Pesach.
Yeah, well, certainly for Pesach, but if you're working in the kitchen all year, that's
Eggs. Is there any reason to, now that the price went up and you're scared you're going to crack them when you wash them now, is there any reason to wash it before using a Pesach or pashtus?
There is no, because they wash it with an isopropyl alcohol, which is not even kidneys. And even if they wash it with a kidneys alcohol before we food grade, that would not be a shaila because it dissipates before Pesach. It certainly doesn't get absorbed through the shell into the egg itself. And they're using isopropyl, which is a synthetic alcohol. There's no reason to be concerned.
Some Hamish hashgachas, including the square Besden for sure, I know is makbid, when they make the mayonnaise or other products, they don't use ibignechtik the ayah.
Right.
But there's a lot of brand name mayonnaise, which probably use what the bakeries use, is canned eggs and whatever. So whoever eats in the bakeries, is there any other issue to worry about? A brand name mayonnaise other than the ibignechtik the ayah?
You know. It's interesting because you're running into an area in halacha. Rabbi has a tshuva about ibignechtik ayah, where he says that it's a milsa b'lei time in the Gemara, and he says therefore it's ein lach b'yosem yichedushay, and Rabbi says clearly that what the Gemara is talking about is if you're taking an egg to use and you open it up and then you leave that's called ibignechtik. But if you prepare it with the specific intention of making frozen eggs, or making sugared eggs, or making refrigerated liquid eggs, it's not b'chlal the gzeira, and you don't have to be concerned about it. So that's the first thing that there's no reason that's what the Semech on. It happens to be that skler b'shita, on many other things are also very, very makbid on these type of inyanim, which we're not going to go into. Windows with chimneys. No, it's something that they're very makbid on in skler. But so this is why the other agencies are not that concerned about that. Now that being said, I could tell you that the agencies that use those eggs in a catering setup, where they have, let's say, cooked eggs, or if they make eggs, if let's say they would have something to make egg salad, they would not leave that overnight without adding something to the eggs, because it's a different thing. But the liquid eggs certainly.
But the other ingredients in the mayonnaise?
It's very simple. Mayonnaise is a very simple item. It's vinegar, oil, and eggs, and egg yolks, and there's a little bit of flavor, mustard. So that's not really a
okay, I'm going to go to a shaila now, which is negay many other shailas later. You mentioned by many shiurim that there's a very big difference between using a brand name item. Let's say somebody is in a place that says no, let's say Hamish hashgachas, and he needs to use, as opposed to using a supermarket item like a ShopRite or any of those, because a lot of times they keep on changing where they make it, right, and how they make it, and where they get the ingredients from.
Private labels.
Is that?
It's called private labels. Yes. Yeah. Private labeling is a very dangerous It's a very dangerous area. So if you have a company that's eingestellt, and by the way, this is not only talking about ShopRite or one of these things. When you have a Hamish brand where the balabas, this is not a fantasy. I'm telling you, it's that takes place. There are the balabatim print the labels, and the label has the name of the hashgacha on it. And they once or twice they go with the Rava Machshir and they go make it, and then they run out of product and they call up the supplier and he doesn't have it, and they have another supplier and they send him the labels and he makes it, and then you call and he didn't know that, it's not only a private label that happens in ShopRite. A lot of Hamish brands have the same status as a private label when it comes to this ASIC. People think that if something is a Hamish label, it is eingeschlossen and it's safe. I just want to just to bring to your attention, Lamoshe, you brought up the mayonnaise. Hellman's mayonnaise is made in Hellman's factory, and the only place they make Hellman's mayonnaise is in Hellman's factory, and they have professional mashgichim who are on top of their production. And even if you say you don't like their shita about ibigeneftige aya, but you know what they're talking about. You know where it's made. You know what they're using. You know when they're making it. The mashgiach is there. It was set up in a way that was reviewed and decided on by professionals. You have Yechezkel Shmerel's mayonnaise, where he decides that he wants to go into the mayonnaise business. He goes to a food show. He meets Billy Bob from Arkansas, who has a manufacturing plant, and he tells Billy Bob, I want to buy mayonnaise. So the guy says, fine, I want to sell you mayonnaise. So he says, I'm going to send the rabbi. So hopefully, the person who goes down to kasher the factory has some idea what kashering is, has some idea what the halacha is, has some idea how to go about doing it, has some idea how the machinery works, because you can kasher a line, and if you don't know that they're using the same steam as you can use in the next room, which is making treif, so what you have just done is you have made mahadrin treif products with the Yiddish label on it. That's, and if you don't understand what's going on, that is what takes place. And it takes place every day. So, you have to know who is watching the productions to make sure that what should be a mahadrin product is at the end of the day a mahadrin product. So, that being said, going back to your original question of private labels, it is always kedai, for a number of reasons, to call whatever hashgacha. Let's say you take ShopRite mayonnaise and it has an OU on it. You call the OU and you find out, first of all, is this an authorized OU? Because every day, every week, in the papers, they have these notifications from the OU and the Chafke and the Starke that the unauthorized use of the label. It happens every day. People, b'yodim u b'lo yodim, end up using or abusing the labels and the symbols, and you have no idea. You walk into the thing. They have you call up the OU, they have where they make, very interestingly, where the OU makes a certain type of product, is made in an OU certified plant, and the OU certified plant is one which I would not recommend, because the balabas is a very, very shver boldav, and he's not makabel morris, and he gives the guys a very hard time all the time. Interestingly enough, ShopRite makes their product there, and they have mishkiach tzmidi. So he's the off-brand made in the same plant is better off than the plain brand. So you have to know. So when you call the OU, and there's one thing about the OU is better than any other hashgacha in the world of answering questions. They have a number, it's 212-613-8241. It's consumer service, and you call and you get answers. Even if they don't take the call right away because they're on the line, they'll get back to you and they'll give you the answers within reason. They can't tell you if you say, "Where is this soda made?" There's proprietary information. They can't share certain who makes the flavors, that they can't tell you. But if you ask them, "Is this product made in a totally kosher, totally parva plant?" Yeah. If it's a totally kosher, totally parva plant, you're 99% of the way home knowing that there's not going to be a problem with this product. But if you go and you say, "Oh, this place like Restaurant Depot are a horrible, horrible chevra. They keep on schlepping. They go every week and they keep running around finding bargains. Where can they get something cheaper here, cheaper there?" And they keep, even Naniach, the OU is on top of it and they go with them. But they're constantly being. Last week, you bought the product because you found out that it was made in a kosher plant. Today it's being made somewhere in Alabama. So that's, I hope, an answer.
Tomato products like ketchup, tomato sauces, tomato paste, Vahoya doesn't need and the pizza sauces, salsa, do they need a real heavy hechsher because it's a complicated product? Or
not because it's a complicated product, but because it's a type of a product which lends itself to non-kosher uses also. That means that companies, for instance, Heinz makes tomato products. They also make non-kosher tomato products. 1 week a year, they make all the non-kosher product, and they have a mashgiach there. They have a mashgiach there during the week that they make non-kosher. They have a mashgiach to make sure that nothing kosher is being made there. And after it's done, the mashgiach kashes the plant.
That's in the United States. There's other Heinz. There's other Heinz's also.
Yeah, I'm just saying. I'm just giving you a muscle. So there are other plants coming in. There's stuff coming in from Italy that I know. I was there with the guy, with the person. He didn't realize that there is a very, very stark need, a pressing need for in tomato type of products that lend themselves to non-kosher to also be very, very careful with the kosher products.
Mustard is there definitely prepared deli, Dijon.
Dijon is a problem because it has wine in it, and. They're not going to use the Ayin Nesach. So if you use any kind of OU wine, you can buy an OU Dijon. I would not recommend it at all. The Dijon from Europe, obviously, you have no idea whose wines they're using. There's a Dijon, there's a Hadar Dijon under the Nir Bater, which I know that when Hadar was under the KHA, they told me that the Mashgiach brings along his own wine to put into the thing, with ked and chlesh, whatever people use. But you have to know that not wine is a very, very, very shver noisa. There are very few wines in this world that are done 100% kedasa kedin, and I doubt if that's the wines they're using in Dijon mustard.
Once you're mentioning wine,
the rest of the mustards are divisional mabata.
Can you talk about wine now? Like which actually is the best? Which?
10 minutes. I'll start off again because many people don't realize this. If you look at the hakdama that the Chachmas Adam has, the Chachmas Adam has a hakdama before he starts Hilchas Yayin Nesach, and he says that people think that it's a gzeir, it's a derabanan, it's a chashash, because of chasnas, because of nisuch, and today the goyim aren't from anyways, they're not menasach, and there's so many, and if you learn the halachas, you see there's a taz, and the shachas mekel, that's a big deal. The Chachmas Adam says a lashon, that he says that regardless of whether you understand it or not, he says the chaimer of stam yenam, he says it is menatek a yid's neshama mishorish kedushasei. For whatever, he doesn't say this about basa v'cholov, he doesn't say it about treif, he says it by yayin nesach, it says it disattaches, it rips away a yid's neshama from the shorish of its kedusha. When you walk into a wine store and you see the walls are full from floor to ceiling with wines that come from places that haven't seen Yidden since Sheishish Mei Bereshis. The last person that was there was the Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov, who was collecting the Nitzoitzes to put together the Neshama Rishena, but there's nothing there. Who goes there? The single most difficult, here's the halacha. The halacha is that if you close your eyes and you walk into a basar meat store, the halacha is Roiv Mitzuyin Eitzes Shchutim Mishchitim Mumchanheim, and Roiv Behemis Kshevis. Now, I'm not telling you to go eat Hebrew National. But that's the halacha. Good, we're better than that. Fine. But people will not eat from a shchita until Yechezkel and Deirish. Who is the Sheikhet's Shviger? Did she have a license? Did his cousin vote in the elections in 1942? You have to know all this before you eat from the shchita. But from wine, you go and you take it. Wine is the most difficult hashgacha to give, for a number of reasons. First of all, and first and foremost, the reason that where it talks about the Burgunin in Masechta Sukkah about you have these little huts where the Shemrei Carmen sit. Why is it Masechta Sukkah? Because that's when it takes place. That's when they do the harvesting. You got people that are doing hashgacha or wine will frequently be away from their home for sukkahs. Certainly, I know mashkichim that davened in the factory on Yom Kippur. They blew shofar in the factory because between Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot is the time they harvest the grapes. That's when you make the wine. And who goes away from their house for those days? So good, there's some Erlicha people in Nachas Shalom saying otherwise. But many of the people that end up going to Azerbaijan or Georgia, not to Georgia where Atlanta is, but to Georgia in what used to be Russia, and that's where they have wine coming from. And you have wine from places in Chile where they don't have a yeket. And what they do in Chile is each little guy on the side of some mountain in the Andes gathers up his grapes and he makes his own little kvetcherai over there. And this is where they're giving hechsherim to. And it's beyond the scope of human imagination that these things are being done right. And people go and they eat and they drink it. And now before you even get to the shilas, that all the leading paiskim of our dor have sveikis, at least, about whether something is considered mavushal when it's pasteurized, for two reasons. There are three things that are mentioned in halacha about yayin mavushal. One is she'ein darke b'kach, so it's a milsa le'shchicha so goes b'rabanan. Two is because it is nismad machmas chaymoi, and it gets thicker, and it does not taste good, so it's not royal nisach. And the simon for this is it's oila avabuis, because it's bubbling. It's boiling. And that shows, and that's a hechrach that it was nismat machmas chaymoi. When they do flash pasteurizing, even the niach, it gets up for a moment to a temperature above Yad Seldes, it is not boiled. It is not boiled. We, at MPGS, we made our own grape juice, which, by the way, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, Rabbi Yashiv, and Rabbi Vad Yosef all said you cannot make a bracha, you cannot make kiddush on grape juice, and reconstituted grape juice, and Rabbi Yashiv said you can't even make a hagafen on it. But we'll get back to that. We'll get back to that later of why. I mean, there's a simple why. I mean, the Gemara says, on apple juice you make a sha'akel, on orange juice you make a sha'akel, on grape juice wine you make a hagafen. Why? Because it's nishtan. The Gemara says it's nishtan lilai. Because now it's something that's better. It's more special. It's every al kaisi ayamali kivir kas Hashem. So it's a dahei b'nezach. If you take the wine and you concentrate it into grape juice concentrate, and you drink that, you make no bracha at all, because it's not royal achil. It's not royal achil or shasi, it's nothing. So the basis of what they're saying is, so you now have a concentrate which you cannot make a bracha on, and you reconstitute it, you put in water, so that now you can drink it. So make a hagafen. Who says it goes back to hagafen? Maybe but most you'll get a sha'akel. Good, you can't drink it without a bracha. So you make a sha'akel, you don't make a hagafen. And this isn't the wine that they were talking about that you make kiddush on. So these things are not simple at all. But the more to the point of the pasteurizing is because now that, first of all wines are pasteurized, except for the very fine shmeka ones. So it's no longer considered milsa le'shchicha. So the criteria that if it's pasteurized, it's considered mavushal, and it's not makabel maga akum, is b'chlal something that's not a davar muskim l'kol at all. The concern that it's nismat machmas chaymoi, which is one of the criteria to be considered mavushal, is simply not true. It's physically not true. When it goes through a flash pasteurizer, the reason they flash pasteurize is because if you don't cook grape juice, it will become sour, period. And these bottles that say non-mavushal, they're either, in that little bottle, the laws of food technology don't apply, or they mean something of the one it says, because it's impossible. If you have a fruit juice, here's the halacha. I'll just tell you a quick word from my father's halacha. He says that like this. He says, why is it so important that every simcha dika, a Yiddish simcha, gets a kais bracha? What's so special about wine? He says, wine is the perfect analogy to what a Yid's avodah is supposed to be. You take grapes, and the way that grapes work is as they're getting ripe, they loosen. There's a stem inside the grape, and the grape opens up a little bit, and a little bit of juice leaks out. And floating around, people that have allergies will know what I'm talking about. There are yeasts that float around in there's pollen, yeast, all these types of things that get. So the yeast gets stuck to the grapes, and then they harvest the grapes and they squeeze them. And the grapes are there, the juice is there, the yeast is there, and that becomes something. That's the concept of what it means to be a Yid. What it means to be a Yid is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put within you everything you need in order to vaksais, to do your tafkid. Amal, Rav Hirsch says, when it says Mizmor, the Mizmor, David about Alagitas, Mizmor David Alagitas, he says it's Meloshem Gas, a Hadracha. Sometimes you need to be gekfetched, sometimes you need a little oppression. And that brings out the juice, and that can start the whole process that turns you into yayin meshubach. But lemaisa, if a person's going to take plain grape juice that's not pasteurized, leave it on your counter. You come back in 3 days, and it's going to be sour, because there's yeast. The yeast, the natural, the teva, it has to be. You can't do anything about it. Yeast will eat the sugar in the juice and turn it to alcohol. Zeho. So.
Maybe they put in sulfites don't help for that?
Sulfites do help, but you can have put in so much you'll be poisoned. In other words, they put in sulfites after they pasteurize it to keep it down, but to just use just sulfites, it's just not. So that's benigeya, the wine and the grape juice. A person has to be very, very careful that they use a hechsher that is aware of all these things, that is willing to spend the money to hire mashkichim of value, mashkichim who are aware of the halacha and have the strength of character to go shtosach keneged. You have all these guys, the goyim that work in the factories, don't want to hear that the Yid says, no, you can't touch that knob. I have to turn the knob. I have to move the barrel. I have to move the hose. I have to connect those. I have to connect the. You can't go. The guy says, I have to test the bricks. No, you can't test the bricks. I'll give you the guys get, so leave me alone. What's up? And you need a mashkiach at 3 o'clock in the morning when you have the 6'7" Schwarzer who wants to go. He says, listen, I'm doing it. And the guy has to say, no, little mashkiach is going to say, no, I'm going to do it. You need people that are bali debava that can make sure that this takes place.
Armon grape juice is done differently? The Armon grape juice, the Armon is done in a Yiddish geschäft where there are no goyim. I've been going to Armon for the MPGS grape juice for 10 years. There is the guy drives the truck to deliver the grapes. He sits in the truck, and they have a bunch of Chassidish Yidden that work there. They, including the high load that takes it for all the chumras. If you want to say like when Rabbi Yasha is concerned about the free run in the gondola, and they do anything and everything from beginning to end until it's in the bottle. So it's certainly a. They pasteurize it.
So which wine is good?
Which wine is good? The Bedatz in Eretz Yisrael has a number of wines that they take. In Eretz Yisrael, they take wine b'chlal. In Eretz Yisrael, they take wine b'chlal needs even much more pika than usual because they do a lot of grafting. And every time you graft onto a vine, you have to start the 3 years of Arla and the 4th year of Netervai over again. And they're constantly working with it. The Bedatz has, and all the Yakovim that they work with, they have each individual vine is numbered, and they have a spreadsheet, a computer system that keeps track of each individual vine. So just because it says, I know this wine, that's the other guy, they do there, it's the same. Yeah, but it's not everything coming out of there is the same. You have the Bedatz, you have Rabbi Avram Rubin from Eretz Yisrael, you have Rabbi Zekbach in France and in Italy, and
he's
you
in
have...
Yisrael now.
He lives in Eretz Yisrael, but the wines that he makes are there. I don't think he has in Eretz Yisrael wines. He has in Italy and France, and in Rabbi Rottenberg from Paris. So That's it.
Before
and
Mincha.
Armon.
Before Mincha, I want to say a story that just happened. One of these Rabbanim that you just mentioned called me up a few months ago, and he tells me, help me out. He says he used to give Ashgacha on a certain liquor, high-grade, upgrade liquor, and they used to use a certain wine to put into the liquor, and because of COVID, they couldn't get hold of it, and the company wanted to make it anyway. So they took the same exact label, took off his name, which was in the corner, they put a different shvacha hechsha on it, and they used wine. He said, you will never touch that wine. And the Hamish Olam buys it like it was the same hechsha as before. Yep. He asked me to be mefarsim it, but you should know that. I don't have to ask him.
You have to say the name of the liquor?
It was Rabbi Zekbach.
Thank you. He says that, and that's it.
I mean, he's good.
He's good, yeah, he's very good.
Yeah, Rabbi said we're going to make a break for 2 minutes, for Mincha, and then 2 minutes later after Mincha we'll follow the Shir Chelik Sheni. Shalos and Shuvas Kashrus Chelik Sheni after Mincha. A größer Shikor, aber kann man Kashrus und Kush Baruch sagen, soll wir Hebel mit Teuer Mitzvus. Shalem Adam Chofes mein Zitka Yagel mit Teuer Viade.
Good to be here.
Kashrus.